This is Be Strong Families webinar series, Staying Strong and Positive for Ourselves and Our Children. And I'm Kathy. I'm joining from Wadsworth, Illinois. As you come into the room, if you could go to the chat, open it up and just say hi and where you're joining from, that would be great. We're back with our long format, our long form. We're going to be here for the next hour or so. Let's wait for some people to come in. Hi, Deborah. Welcome. Welcome, Andrea or Andrea. I don't know if I pronounce how you pronounce it. Hello, Luz from San Jose. Michelle, welcome. Western New York. Jennifer. Hi, Jen. El Paso, Texas. You guys just passed a very interesting law there. It was in the news today. Lawan Massey, welcome. Washington, right? Yeah, Washington, D.C. Hi, Lisa from Washington, D.C. as well. Wonderful to see everybody. Welcome, Brenda. I see some new names and I see some familiar names. It's like, it's wonderful. Really love it that you all are joining us today. So it's after 12. Let's get started. We're expecting a few more people, but we'll just get started. And we are doing the whole fall on Amplify, our Amplify campaign. Amplify, the AMP part of Amplify comes from A More Perfect Union. So we are about conversations that are at the nexus of social justice and parenting. And we're also about how can we bring people together across differences while affirming and celebrating and honoring diversity. So it's our DEI series, and today the topic is learning about and celebrating so-called others. I'm saying so-called others because we have it in quotes. Hi, Tammy, Taquana, Alejandra, Elizabeth. Nice to see you here today. So I want to thank Andrew for having created a couple new slides for our intro, catching us up with what we actually do. In these Amplifies, I said we went back to long form. So we're here for 45 minutes to an hour. And I'm going to spend the first part of the webinar kind of contextualizing, giving you some food for thought that will then frame the questions that we ask. And as those of you who have been here before know, and those of you who haven't, welcome. Most of this is about interaction and discussion, and each of us, kind of like in cafes, but each of us addressing the questions for ourselves and sharing with others what we think and how we feel. And that's the bulk of the webinar. It is being live streamed to our YouTube channel. The recording will be available after the webinar has ended. Sometimes people ask, can we have the slides? Can we have the webinar? Can I recommend that somebody go somewhere? And yeah, we're doing it to our YouTube channel now. So that's the format. And ways to engage. The primary way to engage is what you've already gotten warmed up with, which is the chat. And you can see this to everyone. You want to make sure that you're writing to everyone, which everyone is so far. So that's great. And then if you want to say something, if you're going to speak and you want to speak and actually be heard, you can raise your hand in the bottom. There's that little raise hand function. See, my hand is raised right there. And we'll unmute you. And then Andrew will unmute you. And then you will need to unmute yourself in order to be heard. So that's the ways to engage. In addition, whenever we do anything at Be Strong Families, we have agreements. And this is in recognition that we co-create this safe space together. And so it's not me, it's not Andrew, it's not that are creating the environment, it's all of us together. And it's the energy of honoring each other and being interested in each other. So we ask that if you could agree to these agreements, speak from your own experience, treat other people the way you want to be treated, be here now. And if you need a minute, take a minute. Tammy agrees, Michelle agrees. I just need a lot of agreement. I need a lot of activity in the chat. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So we're diving into this topic of otherness. And again, the questions are coming from A More Perfect Union Parent Cafe in a Box. As I said, the AMP and Amplify. So this is available. You can have these conversations with your friends and family, or if you're doing cafes, you can use this deck. It's organized around the protective factors. But before we get to the box, we're going to go into the context of otherness and othering. So I pulled this definition from the web. I'd just like you to read it for a minute. I'm not going to read it to you, but I want to just ask you what words jump out at you. Or what is this concept of othering from your perspective? Adrian, thank you. Us versus them. Yeah. Us versus them, in group and out group, right? And then the tendency to perceive normative, like, yeah, Jennifer, so that there's a perceived normative, and then there's also a perceived, like, anybody who's out of that normative, they sometimes get attributed negative characteristics. So if there's a normative, perceived normative social group, that anybody who's outside of that might be attributed negative characteristics by the people in the normative social group, and then perhaps even by themselves, which is very deep. Anything else? So this process essentially involves looking at others and saying they're not like me, or they're not one of us, and feeling some kind of way about that, not like me, not one of us. So would you say that this type of othering is positive or negative, or just neutral? Tammy feels it's negative, negative, negative. Yeah, I feel like it's kind of negative too. What would make it more positive? Can be neutral, but it's often negative. Yeah, what would make it neutral, or what would make it more positive? Yeah, accepting everyone, celebrating the difference. Different is good. Yeah, acceptance. Right. And also just acknowledgement, to me, like, you know, there's a level at which, I don't know whether this is spiritually or whatever, but there's a level at which we are all one, you know, we are all one race, the human race, right? Stop the division. Yes, Adrian, like, so that if people would treat others the way they wanted to be treated, you wouldn't need the labeling. Yep. And you can acknowledge differences without stigmatizing. Yes, you're on it. Okay, so othering can be a negative thing. It could also, in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it can be a positive thing, because we're rich because of the differences, you know, and it's not. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, because this was something that Be Strong Families, we've been in this almost year-long journey with this intercultural development inventory tool, which is research-based. I mean, it has a lot of evidence behind it. You can go to their website. I don't know, Andrew can drop it in the chat. And it's a tool for having people, for locating individuals and then also a collective. So we did it, each person at Be Strong Families took this inventory, and we each got a reading on where we were on this continuum. And then we also, as a group, they told us where we were on the continuum. And then we've been having discussions and staff development and brown bag lunches to kind of, and the opportunity in the report that we each got was to kind of figure out how we could expand from where we were and do some things, like do some reading or do some talking or do some experiencing that would move us beyond where we were with relation to culture, with relation to a monocultural mindset. So I'm just going to take you through, I'm not saying this is the best tool. I'm not saying it's the only tool by far. I am saying it's a tool, and it was a starting place for us in terms of internally getting a read on where we were. And again, a lot of our staff got very antsy very early. It was like, okay, but this isn't anti-racism. We want to go to the anti-racism place, and we're doing that too. But this is a way of like just locating yourself on the continuum. So the continuum is a monocultural mindset, is a mindset where you only have one culture, one culture. So you can imagine if you lived on a desert island and there was no internet and there was no communication and you were with your people, your tribe, you would be in a monocultural mindset because you had no contact with anybody outside your culture. And actually, there are people who even now are kind of in this monocultural mindset that they only know, I'll answer you in a second, Adrian. They only really know their own culture. Then the first step on this is denial. So this is missing difference, like, that there isn't anybody else. There isn't anybody else but me, or there's no one worth considering except for our people. That's a very ethnocentric point of view, is the denial of difference. There are no differences. Human beings are all the same. Polarization is the us versus them. Polarization, and I love the question, can you vary depending on your circumstances? According to this tool, you are primarily in one place, but I can see myself, moving between these, and it's not a straight linear progression. And I think that that's the limitation of linear tools, where you go from where it seems like there's a linear progression, because everything is much more nonlinear and dynamic than that, right? But polarization is where you judge difference. So it's like, that's what the othering was, like, we're good and everybody else is not as good as we are. And anything that they do differently isn't as good as what we do. That's an us versus them polarization mindset. And again, they go out, they point out in this that it's not like you're trying to get to the end. It's not like there's a good place to be and a bad place to be. And that, like, if you're in denial, it sounds a little bit bad, but if you're in denial or you're in minimization, that's necessarily a bad place to be. There are good reasons to be in minimization. There are good things that come out of each of these stages. So in polarization, one of the good things that comes out of it is a real appreciation for your own culture. It's a real, like, groundedness and rootedness in the us, So that's a positive. Minimization is where you minimize difference. So it's kind of like being colorblind, right? Then that we're all the same underneath, and so therefore people don't feel seen. The negative part of minimization is people don't feel seen for who they are. And the positive part of minimization is you're finding commonality. You're all about finding commonality, and that is making bridges. So there's positives and negatives in each of these. Acceptance is when you deeply comprehend difference, like you see the differences. I think one of the things behind this whole intercultural development continuum is it's not so easy to see differences all the time. We all are kind of stuck in our own mindset, and it's not so easy to even note the differences sometimes. You just can blow right past them. But acceptance is where you deeply comprehend difference, and adaptation bridges across difference. So that's where you can speak another language, so to speak. Like you understand how to that it is different in a different context, and you know how to adapt to this. There's also one that I fell into that's off the chart, which shouldn't be off the chart, but political reasons it moved off the chart, which is called integration. And that's like when you have been bicultural, so some of us are like maybe in this and saying, I don't know. I mean, I was an anthropology person in undergraduate college, and I've also participated in in Orthodox Judaism, so it's a culture that I know very well, and I can adapt. It's an adaptation thing, but it's also like an integration. So if you're bicultural, many people immigrants can be bicultural, right? You learn the language, you learn the culture, and you can do both, not just adapt. but you can do both. So anyway, I just thought, I mean, this is, I hope I did a decent job explaining this. It's not my tool, but we did use it. Anybody have any questions about this or comments about it? How does it feel to you? Can you, where would you say if you were, what's really interesting is like, a lot of people think they're at adaptation or think they're at acceptance, and they turn out to be a little bit lower down the scale. That was very, mind-blowing for a lot of our staff, because they thought they would be a little bit further along the scale than they actually turn out to be. But then when they had their interview with well, I don't even know what they're called, but the specialists on this tool, they understood kind of why they showed up there. So any questions or comments on this tool and how it might be helpful to get beyond othering in the negative? Okay, so Jennifer says she's wondering how they define other when you take the assessment. And that's a really good question. I don't remember that they I don't know if they used the word other in the assessment. It was more like about behaviors and attitudes and about difference. Like they're very big on difference and what you do with difference and how you react when you're in a group, and those kinds of things. I don't remember what exactly the questions are, but there's a website, and that's why I thought Andrew was going to he put it in the chat, IDI inventory. It's a big website. And I guess to find out where you are, you take their inventory, and it's a process. And you have to take it, I think you have to take it with people who are trained in debriefing you on it. So it's more of a collective thing, but you can check it out. So anyway, moving from monocultural to intercultural is I think relevant to the topic of how do we celebrate people we perceive as other or non-normative social group. Let's go to the next slide, Andrew. I put this in here just because I think, and I'll read it. It says the inability to see things from another's perspective is at the root of relationship problems everywhere, from personal life to work to conflicts between religions, cultures, and nations. We need some shifts in focus to see the world through another person's eyes. Generally, our resistance to doing so comes from two sources. We know we're right and the other person is wrong, or we think if we had to see things from the other's point of view, we might have to give up our own. So to me, moving from like some abstract, tool with categories and moving from the concept of othering into like a very psychologically familiar place, I think we all have experience both trying to see things from another person's perspective and not being able to, or being resistant to doing so. So what do you think about this? Do you agree that inability to see things from another's perspective is at the root of relationship problems everywhere? You think it's possible to see the world through another person's eyes? Lynn says she agrees with the statement, Deborah too. I know having to be right and like that whole binary thing, Brenda too, that and Nicole, that right and wrong, like if somebody's got to be right and somebody's got to be wrong, that there's a zero-sum game. We can't kind of that kind of thinking, that kind of binary thinking can be really undermine our ability to be able to be in community together. And we think if we had to see things from others' point of view, we might have to give up our own. I think that's a deep one. And Janine says, so Lisa says, what is empathy? What do you think, Lisa? I think, and if you have the answer question, you have the answer. And Janine says, I think number 2 is key to why we have difficulty seeing things from another's perspective. Yeah, I was reading something from a spiritual teacher this last week. I was on vacation and I was reading a lot. And that was a point that this teacher was making also, that you don't have to give up your own point of view because you fully understand another's. Both of them can live within you simultaneously, and then you have more perspective on whatever the issue is, right? Like, but if you just resist or reject a point of view that's different from yours, or feel like you're being pressured, that someone is asking you to come over and just not see through your own eyes, but only see through their eyes, then that can feel very oppressive. Adrian says, people have been taught one way. Many people are open to learning a new way of seeing the world, but we're human and sometimes we fall back on how we were originally taught, even if we know it's wrong. And Deborah says, yes, fear of losing ourselves is a great prohibitor to understanding other views. And Lisa says, I think empathy is being able to see another person's experience from their point of view. Yeah, it's interesting, Lisa, because when you said, what is empathy? It was like more about feeling to me. Empathy is more about feeling, but I guess you have to put yourself in somebody's position. And Adrian says it takes more thought and time to reflect and then empathize. Lisa, you need to change your, Lisa and Janine, you need to change your thing to and make it to everyone, because Deborah says she's not seeing everyone. And I see that, like, Erica, you just did it to host and panelists. So I'm reading what everybody's saying, but the people who are trying to follow along aren't seeing what you're saying. So Erica says, it's important to hear people out without giving up your religious autonomy. Seeking to understand first is critical to relationship development indeed. And Lynn says, there's also the aspect of engaging from ego. Oh, wow, I love that, Lynn. Can you say more about that? You want to be unmuted and talk about what your view of engaging from ego versus not engaging from ego? And yes, Lisa, we could see you now. Tammy says, I work hard at continuing to see things from other perspectives. Sometimes it changes what I believe, other times it doesn't. But I can respect other opinions and ideas without agreeing. I don't need to be right. I'm comfortable letting things go and just listening to others. Just because they see things differently doesn't invalidate my own views. Lynn's ready. It is Lynn raised her hand. Andrew okay, cool. Luz agrees with Tammy. Adrian agrees with Lisa and Erica. Lynn, can we hear you? Can you unmute yourself? Because Andrew has unmuted you. I see your name, so I know you're here, but there's a way of, like, if you check the bottom left and see if there's an X through your microphone. Can you talk now? There's an X through your microphone, which you need to remove. On my screen, it's at the bottom left. Oh, well. I was really interested in this beyond ego because I've been thinking a lot about that too. I think the ego is, Andrew says she's unmuted herself. Your mic is glitching, yeah. So I'm sorry to hear that, but I was vibing with you on the beyond ego, because I think the ego is where, and when Tammy was saying where we need to be right, or we're in the middle of, we're not able to kind of like pull away from and just, kind of be in our higher selves. Like we're in this place of judging and we're in this place of needing to be right. And we're in this place of pride and feeling like if we, and needing to win in some way, and it's just like it's a very stressful way of being, I think. All right, although it's very normal and human too. So So I loved it when something is coming out in the chat, people being self-reflective and thinking, yeah, it's we try to be one way and then we revert, we backslide. We're not perfect. So let's go to the questions now. Like all this discussion in relationships. Tammy says, in relationships, is there ever really a winner with those things though? I had a discussion. It reminds me of a discussion. I went on a trip with my mom and my two sisters this last week. That's where I was. And Lisa, my sister, was talking about how she felt like since we were children, like I defend my point of view very vociferously. And she feels like I'm trying to get her to agree. And if she doesn't agree, then somehow like I'm going to beat her down until she agrees. Right. And I'm like, wow, that's not the way I think of it at all. Like I'm a person that likes debating and likes arguing, and I can be passionate about what I think, but I really don't want to, kind of overpower other people. And I said to her, so like we have to have a safe word or something, because if I'm getting too intense energetically, like you could say, we could just have a safe word so that I'll back off, because I'm really not trying to change your mind. I'm just trying to it's just fun for me to do that. It's like, it's not fun for her. So I think that the thing is like, how do we, like in that personal anecdote, like how do we recognize other people's needs and other people's different tolerance, and how do we adjust our own words, thoughts, and actions to create harmony? And I think that that's what moving beyond ego does in relationships also, is like you're striving for harmony, not at the cost of like complete self-abnegation, but you're striving for harmony. How do you harmonize with somebody? And if one person's energy is woo and the other person's energy is oh, like that's not harmony. You have to kind of bring it together. Adrian says that is cultural, it's taught. Yes, moving beyond ego, learning to tone it down and when to be quiet. Mm-hmm. And respectful. Like what I really spent a lot of time thinking about, what does it mean to be respectful? And especially of an elder. My mom is an elder. And how do we bring that respect for elders into the conversation? Because she was very, I don't know, she needs help, and more help maybe now than she had in the past. But she said something very deep. I think when she said, I don't want to be the child to my children. Like, I don't want to be the child to my children. I was like, wow, no, I wouldn't want that either necessarily. And serving an elder isn't the same as taking care of a child. Anyway, lots of that. Tammy says, I see that between my daughters. They both want to be right and they get frustrated. Usually the younger one loses or backs down. Seems to me they both lose. I like to keep the peace. Adrian says, BSF has taught me a lot about staying quiet and just truly listening to others. And Tammy says, I agree, Adrian, the cafes are great practice. And Lynn says, I strive to listen and give space to ideas different than my own, or using language in a way that is different than the way I express. I think more curiosity is also helpful, right? And this is, you're answering the question too, what concepts or resources have helped you the most when it comes to expanding your capacity to include and embrace diversity? And that listening place, the curiosity about, what are they saying? Instead of like judging it immediately, like that's deep for me too. Like not having to like, is this what I think? If so, if yes, good. If no, bad. but more just openness to, that's another person's point of view. And Janine says, harmony has to be your goal instead of getting your point across. We must be less concerned with ourselves and more concerned with creating harmony. Nice. And Deborah says, TikTok has been a safe space to learn. TikTok has been a safe space to learn from marginalized communities without adding trauma to those communities by asking to be educated on those issues. Nice, Deborah. Adrian says, I just learned from my daughter that it's important to not speak after people of color. white or near white voices remove people of color's voice. Tammy says, I like that. Harmony is my word for the day. And Lynn says, I strive to read spiritual resources from different faith groups. Nice. Any other concepts or resources that have helped you when it comes to expanding your capacity to include or embrace diversity? Harmony, listening, TikTok. I think for me, I really resonate with the thing about removing people of color's voices by speaking after them or that kind of thing. And I think that just and not wanting people on TikTok, like not wanting to adding trauma by asking to be educated on the issues. But it is through relationship for me. It is through relationship, and I'm going to say intimate relationship, deep friendships, lovers, who are different from me, and really caring about their experience, and really, because love, I guess to me, love is about really making space for the other person's ideas and making space for the other person's thoughts and beliefs and feelings and all of that. So if you say you love, but you're not doing that, are you loving? That was my question to myself. Am I really loving, or is it just a word? So I think that love, like what we learn in an intimate relationship, there's also just, if you're coming, one of Be Strong Family's values is love. So if you're coming from a loving place and you're expanding that love to others, then to me, that is the motivation and the resource for embracing diversity. Erica says, to be honest, I love to be honest. Thank you, Erica. I'm still working on listening without feeling the need to evangelize. I thank you for being honest. And that's why we were saying with the IDI inventory, it's really about knowing where you are and then working on where you want to move to. Good. Deborah's joined the DEI committee at work. And Lou says, I remember taking a test similar to the one where I was able to look more into my implicit biases. Yeah, the Harvard implicit biases test. And Tammy says she's also found those very helpful. Andrew put our value of love into the chat. And Janine says, I think it's important simply to ask questions you don't know. That may mean asking permission to ask the question and making your intentions known up front. And I agree, Kath, this does come through a properly cultivated relationship. And you have to be willing to, I was doing a lot of also reading before I went on vacation about the concepts of rupture and repair and the things necessary. Those of you in early childhood, or those of you in, you've probably heard these psychological concepts of rupture and repair. Like a relationship can get stronger after a conflict or after a rupture if repair is done. And what this one article that I read was talking about was how what was needed for repair was forgiveness on the one side. And then I'm trying to remember what the second thing was. And it was teaching and learning, like being willing to teach and being willing to learn. So I think it's like apologizing and forgiving, or taking responsibility and then forgiving is part of the repair process. And also teaching and learning, because if the rupture happened, the other person might not fully understand what your needs are or what your, what happened. So being willing to teach, being willing, even if it seems like completely obvious to you, being willing to teach, and then being willing to learn. So I thought that was really deep in terms of relationship building. Just because you ask, don't expect a positive response. Sometimes people are so bombarded with teaching others. Yes, I wasn't talking about like generally teaching. I was talking about in the context of a relationship where you've hurt somebody and you need to repair it. And just one article that I read said there's the acknowledging it, then there's the acknowledging what you did, and then forgiveness has to be there on the other side. And that seemed obvious to me, like forgiveness is pretty common, but the whole idea that there might be something to learn there in order so that it doesn't get repeated, and that people need to teach. And then the one person that's been hurt has to be willing to, if the relationship matters, if you're going to repair it, you have to be willing to say what you need to the other person and take responsibility for that. And then the other person has to be willing to learn. And not all relationships get repaired, but the point was that if there's a rupture and you want to have a repair process, all those things need to be there. And Deborah says, I would love for asking questions to be an acceptable way of learning from others, but I found it's not always well received. Yes, I love it when I'm asked questions. Yeah, that's true. That's a true thing. People are at different places, and different day, like how exhausted you are, how many questions you've been asked, what's happened, how many microaggressions you've endured, like that kind of, what space you're in. So I think that there's not like there isn't a rule book on this. Yes, Adrienne likes White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. She has a very detailed explanation of how to apologize correctly. There's one line in the book I do not accept, but I do empathize and understand it. Deborah says, my sister and I have grown in our relationship, but we had to set aside being offended and let each other explain our understanding, intention, and then take each other at our word. Nice. Erica says, asking questions absolutely allows you to strengthen your ability to listen and learn instead of getting in teaching mode. Awesome. Let's go to the next question. We have a lot of them. So this is where we go about celebrating others. And we have three different cultures, and these are questions from the deck, and we have other cultures in the deck as well. But like part of this is where you go about asking questions. Part of learning is really focusing. So when we think about what have you learned and what do you need to learn about Native Americans and Native American experience? And then the next question, Andrew. What have you learned and what do you need to learn about women in American and world history? And how is America enriched by African American culture? So this could go so many different ways. Like we have a contract with the Department of Children and Family Services for the Youth Advisory Board, and we're establishing they want affinity groups in the Youth Advisory Board. They want one for LGBTQIA+, they want one for African American, they want one for Latinx. I think they're going to have one for people with disabilities, kids in the system with disabilities. They're probably going to have a white allies group. But in all of those situations, one of the foundations is that the experience is different and the history is different and the point of view may be different and the contributions may be. Okay, so Adrienne says all three questions deal with historical oppression, suppression, and canceling. And Deborah says, Indigenous people groups are still being marginalized by systemic racism by our governments. So are the other two, Adrienne says. I was having a conversation about family sustainability and even by laws, and family sustainability and sustainability in general. And one of the people there works at Yale, and they've been doing surveys on climate change and environmental attitudes towards climate change for like 10 years. And so it's interesting because one person in the group said, that environmentalists are overwhelmingly white and privileged people. That was an assumption. And the woman from Yale said, that's an assumption, and it's an idea that many people share. But when in our surveys, guess who the people are who care the most about the climate and the earth? And the answer was Indigenous people and people of color, and especially low-income people of color, because the connection to the earth and the problems brought about by climate change are so palpable and real and inescapable. So it's like Reverend Yearwood, and after Katrina, with recognizing that there's a connection between climate change and what happened after Katrina, or what's happening now with Ida. Yeah, that's what, right, Adrian. Low income, Indigenous, and people of color are traditionally living in the most damaged physical environments. So yeah, but it was just like the biases, like it makes like a total sense, but it's very cool when research says, hey, what you all think is about environmentalists, you're talking to it yourselves, but actually Indigenous people and people of color have more sophisticated ideas about the environment and more interested in climate change and that kind of thing than who you think is. Lynn says, American history has to be taught from early grades with the truth of these people in America, integrating the histories of all these groups year round, rather than assigning a month to celebrate them. I would say that too. And and Adrian, I didn't mention it, but it's fascinating to me that most of our issues stem from white patriarchy. Yes, and that patriarchy doesn't get enough play these days, in my opinion, also, because it's really there. Andrew says, one of my goals this fall is to learn more about the history of Native Americans pre-1776. A lot of my knowledge of early America is subpar, and I recognize it's a blind spot in my understanding of the world. So you can imagine in a table with 4 people, or 5 people talking about these questions, like how is America enriched by African American culture? And there's like 1,000 ways, but you can imagine that you jump off from these questions. It's not just answering the question, it's jumping off from the question into other kinds of things, like why aren't those contributions recognized? And it's a way of getting to understanding the dynamics that you all are totally in touch with about oppression and suppression and canceling and domination, but it's a way of getting there more organically, I guess. Adrian, Andrew, read Heather Cox Richardson's blog post. She does, I get her, she does you can get an email from her every day. I do. And I think she's in Maine. Erica says, instead of grouping folks, it sure would be nice if we spoke of these issues in terms of individuals. The generalizations further perpetuate othering. Our individual experiences absolutely shape our attitudes, behaviors, and belief systems. Thank you, Erica. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like trying to acknowledge and see, that's what I was saying. For a minute, I'm just going to go to the intercultural development inventory for a second, because everything has an other side to it, right? It's like the danger of talking about cultural groups is that you other them, and the danger of not talking about cultural groups is that they become invisible. So it's a really double-edged sword, and it's interesting how to negotiate those things. How to become an ally of people from other cultures, other experiences. The oppression isn't all in the past. Lisa, Carol Mizuguchi did a really good webinar for Be Strong Families a few months ago that you might want to check out. I don't know if it's on our YouTube channel or on our website, but she did a really good webinar on exactly that topic, which is, allies, how to be an ally, what an ally is. And also how it's not like, she said one really interesting thing she said, we can go to the next question, Andrew, but one really interesting thing that she talked about was how people have different degrees of power in different settings. Carol Mizuguchi, can you write Carol Mizuguchi? And oh, there it is. You can see Lisa up there. Okay, because she brought up like, if you're in a when do you have privilege? Like, people have privilege in different groups and people have more privilege. So she brought up the example of if you're in an African American context and you are and everybody's a Christian in the room, and a Muslim woman comes in, then she might need allies in that context, and you would need to think about whether you want to be an ally, what it means to be an ally to her in that context. Because whenever there's like a group that agrees on something, and then and that's the kind of the currency, and that's kind of the hierarchy, anybody who comes from outside of that position needs an ally. So Erica says, so for example, although I identify as African American, I'm multicultural, educated, spiritual, traditionally Christian, working class individual with lots of experiences that can cross categories. So that's intersectionality, right, Erica? Is that what you're talking about? Intersectionality? Yeah, very, very important concept. So now we move to, this is the part about like knowing about yourself, starting with yourself. And so the question is, how do you learn about and honor your ancestors? How do you learn about and honor your ancestors? So this is a deep one for me because annual family reunions. Nice, Erica. Religious activities. Thank you, Adrian. I would tell you, when I first started becoming conscious of, there was a long time that I didn't want to celebrate or honor my ancestors because I felt like they were part of the problem. They were the problem. Like, so, and I've moved to a place of celebrating and honoring ancestors because they're all in me, in who I am now, and if I hate my ancestors, then I'm basically hating myself, and self-hate isn't a good place to come from if what you're trying to do is love. So Adrian says, teaching your children. Brenda says, continue to share the stories with future generations. Nicole says, bi-yearly family reunions and talking to older family members. Tammy says, my mom and I like to reminisce and tell stories about my grandparents and great-grandparents. And Deborah says, I guess I don't really. My family is not great at talking or relating to each other, very dysfunctional. Lisa says, listening to stories from the elders in your family. Jennifer says, listen to parent stories about family. Tammy, keeping traditions alive. Yeah, understanding that you are not your parents or grandparents or ancestors. Yeah, I'm not, but I am also. I mean, that was, it's like, that's the complexity. Lynn says family reunions. I mean, for me, the only way I got to being able to honor and learn about them was by recognizing that it was continuous, that I was continuous with them now, and that they were all flawed people, and that they were, and I don't know everything about them, but a lot of people have difficulty with their ancestors, no matter where you come from. I mean, you don't have to be white to have difficulties with your ancestors. And self-love requires looking at the positive of what your ancestors gave you. And that's been, there's a lot about that, a lot about the resilience, the brilliance, the the beauty of your ancestors. So Deborah says, I hear you, it's, oh, Adrian, I hear you, it's complicated. And Deborah says, I'm trying to strengthen generations going forward, however. Yes, I think that's right. I think that's, got to be the change you want to see in the world, right, Deborah? All right, let's go to the next question. And Janine says, it's quite difficult for me since my family is very quiet about our ancestry due to deep trauma from the past. So I try to honor my ancestors, trying to create a legacy moving forward and trying to encourage my elders to be more open. My siblings and cousins have resolved. We have to be the starting point. Yeah. I mean, I went there with the elders thing. Again, I was just saying it was so deep for me when I was talking to my mom and she said she didn't want to be the child of her children. And I was saying, Mom, to me, there's two different times of life when our bodies, when we need people to take care of us physically, and they're very, very different. Like a baby is brand new coming into this world, doesn't know anything, doesn't know how to do anything, doesn't know how to take care of themselves, isn't physically capable. And we protect and care for them until they get that capacity. But at the end of your life, you've been giving your whole life, like you, mommy, you've been giving your whole life, you've been contributing, you've been gaining wisdom, you've been working on yourself, you've been, so, at the end of your life, towards the end of your life, when things start breaking down in your physical body, it's very different to take care of you, like it's kind of a privilege. It's like, washing the feet of the saints, because we want to honor what you've given and what you've contributed and what you've tried to do in this world, and I think it's like that. I just think there's something to that, that, and people are imperfect, people mess up, people do terrible things, but if they're here, I mean, this is my spiritual, so I don't want to try to proselytize, people don't have to agree with me, but I just like, there's something about respect and human dignity for people are here. If you believe that, in God or higher power or whatever, they're here for a reason. They're here for a reason, and not all those reasons are, I wouldn't want to have those reasons. I wouldn't want my life to have that reason. So how do you just honor the fact that people are doing the best they can and that they're here for a reason? Examine my own biases, listen. What's one small thing you can do to help heal the divisions in our country? I guess I have to stop talking. What's one small thing? Andrew moved me on. Erica says, yes, Deborah, start with yourself and your family. If everyone started there, it would be a great start, modeling. Adrian says, say hello. Lou says, keep learning and share my knowledge with others. Erica says, be authentic. Andrew says, question the status quo set by institutions. Lynn says, be compassionate. Janine says, keep an open mind and strive to care for others. Engage in civil discourse. Anything else? Promoting harmony. That came out earlier. Striving for harmony, remembering the good and sharing it. Maybe just not hating. Be kind, Jennifer says. Lisa says, interrupt bias when it's happening around you. Also be open to supporting people as they grow and change. Love it. And I think honoring others as well as caring for the children makes us a, how do I say this? Sometimes I don't think it's about sewing the wound shut, or healing the divisions, like, okay, now we get along. I think it's about creating a more humane, a kinder, just in general, culture, and I think if people practice kindness with small children, if they practice respect for elders, if they practice care for animals, that expands compassion and it expands peace, and those things help heal the divisions in the country without it being just like a one-on-one, so that's what I think. Erica says, validate others with affirmations and sincere compliments. It goes a long way when people see you. Yeah, that's very deep, Erica. Thank you. It's very helpful. That's love, right? I mean, seeing another person, validating them is coming from a place of love and respect. So I think coming from a place of love and respect with regard to people, animals, the earth, each other would be a good start. Well, thank you for being here today. Let's go to the next slide. They do a great job in our office here. Cool. We have another Friday is a More Perfect Union Cafe. Next slide, Andrew. Our YouTube channel, if all of you head on over there and just subscribe to our YouTube channel, that would be great. Follow it. That would be awesome. More Perfect Union, these questions and other great questions this whole couple months are going to be coming from this deck. That would be fabulous if you want to use the deck with your friends and family or in your cafes. Next slide. Is that the last slide, Andrew?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We ended a couple minutes early. Appreciate you all for being here and look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Love each other.